This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Is it time to reimagine your future? The right business skills may make a difference in your career. At Capella University, we offer a relevant education that's designed to focus on what you need to know in the business world. We'll teach professional skills to help you pursue your goals, like business management, strategic planning, and effective communication. And you can apply these skills right away. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
On the line right now, he was giving us a few of his Michael Jackson imitations as he was doing great talk radio, keeping the tradition of WABC alive with live and local. Our news guy and now / talk show host, James Flippin. How is Christmas out in Bloomfield, New Jersey, James?
Curtis, it was a absolutely amazing Christmas out here in Bloomfield. We didn't deep fry any turkeys. And despite my status as a WASP, we had a delicious lasagna. So thank you for asking. It was a very nice, relatively low-key Christmas at the Flippin household.
If you don't eat well, I'm going to report you to Dr. Mihalos.
Well, John, I can report that it was definitely a lot of food that was enjoyed, a lot of close time with family, kind of talking about memories and just reminiscing on some of the great stuff that we've had during past Christmases. So it was all in all great, and I hope for you guys it was both great as well.
But be honest, James. You had the lasagna because you're in an Italian area, Bloomfield, outside of North Newark, where almost 9 out of every 10 people are Italian, so you wanted to blend in.
It's true. I grew up as a guy who became Italian through osmosis, Curtis, John. That's what it's like when you live in Essex County. You got so many great delis here, so many great grandmothers who are sharing with you their red sauce and their pasta and all this kind of stuff. So, no question about it. You got to know how to eat well in Essex County.
John, I want to commend James Flippin. The other morning, once again, there was a rush to identify that poor victim who was a Human Torch. And we had some folks that were feeding information that was incorrect, would have been very damaging, creating the impression that it was a young lady, age 29, white woman, who was a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania. It was all bogus, and it was James Flippin in the newsroom who said to everybody who was trying to spread that, stop it. We've had no verification. I am not going with that. And I want to applaud you for having done that, James.
Well, Curtis, it's one of those things where in this day and age, it's obviously, like we say, the information age, and you open up these social media apps, a lot of time there's really good information on there. And sometimes there's these kind of citizen journalists who are digging into the fact pattern, and Curtis, you know it well because your wife, Nancy, they're able to do stuff that maybe some of the traditional news organizations, just because of the way their mission is established, and let's not even get into that, but the citizen journalists can do a lot of deep diving. So you want to stay up on social media and stay abreast of kind of what's being reported there, but you do it with a little bit of suspicion. And that's what you're talking about, Curtis. It's all about, well, wait a second. Is this, in fact, a plausible situation? What's the documentation that they're linking back to show that this alleged identity of this victim could be true? And you noted it. It was almost a perfect victim narrative for people that are more on the right to say, oh, my gosh, this is an absolutely horrific crime, as if it wasn't bad enough already. It's a young woman who was working as a nurse, or some people said on social media that she was going to visit her grandmother that morning, and then there was a quote attributed to a boyfriend. Again, that turned out to be more or less a fake story that was created along the lines of driving a narrative. So you have to be really careful. It's not necessarily the rush to be first, but the rush to be accurate. And I think what's so great about the way you can accurately report the news is say, hey, look, and we did it that morning, Curtis. We said, look, there are some reports out there on social media suggesting that the victim's been identified. We're not going to say that's true right now because we haven't seen any credible reporting on that. We haven't seen a number of outlets. And sometimes we'll just attribute it to those outlets and say, CNN is reporting, the New York Times is reporting, the AP says that wasn't happening in this instance. And sometimes it's a little bit of a judgment call when you think, hey, I could say that this is happening and being reported on social media. Sometimes you just allude to what's happening in terms of the general report and say, we're not going to get into that right now. Let's see what's happening. You don't necessarily have to be first. You have to be right.
Correct. And you put your foot down like news director. I was here right near Nome Laden when we were tracking down the identity of the guy who almost killed Donald Trump on July 13th in Butler.
Right.
There was all misinformation. Nome said, no, we're not going with that guy, who turned out, John, to be a sports reporter in Milan who had like 40 people outside of his door. He said, what are you doing outside of my door? You tried to kill Trump. He said, I'm a sports journalist. I'm here in Milan. How could I have been in Butler, Pennsylvania? Oh, my God, the lawsuits this guy filed. He's collecting money as he goes on because, again, John and our audience, people in their desire to be the first, sometimes they'll go with the flow, provide misinformation that with a station like ours, the most powerful in the nation by day, coast to coast, the most powerful at night, they're going to come for our owner-operator, John Catsimatidis, and said, my reputation has been damaged severely. And, oh, my God, the scatto, the moolah, shmoolah. So between you and Noam, you've done a good job.
Well, thanks, Curtis. And, you referenced Noam, our news director. Years ago, I was kind of being trained, let's say, and coached over at Women's Only Radio, as you sometimes refer to it. And we always would talk about the story of Richard Jewell, the guy during the CNN accusations tied into that Olympic bombing down in Atlanta back in 1996, that this guy, they said it has to be this guy. It's definitely this guy. And I think even the cops had sort of used the news to their advantage in that instance and said, we think it's this guy. We want you guys to put some pressure on this guy. And it turned out that it wasn't Richard Jewell. And he kind of had his life more or less ruined. And it made for a really powerful test case. You got to be careful when you go to some of these identities.
Now that you're in the swim of things as a talk radio show host on occasion here at WABC, what's it been like? Because I remember that day you came into me, Studio B, you said, I'd like to substitute when time is available, and I said, go for it. What was that transition like?
Well, look, I think in honesty, I have a ton of opinions all the time about these stories, and I have my own emotions and sort of human reaction to the stories that we cover as a news team. And most of the time, you kind of stuff that down. You say, all right, let's check that at the door. The opinion is the opinion. I'll share it later on social media or something, or talk to my friends about it. And maybe you, Curtis, say, I really feel this type of way about this story. But you try your best when you're doing the news to just kind of take that part of it out. Sometimes you can't. I remember reporting on that story, of course, the horrific subway burning death last weekend. And you can't help but say, and this creep went and did this, and unbelievably, this happened next. So emotions do come into it a little bit, but you try to take that opinion out and say, this is what we think happened. People that tend to think this type of way might suggest this is important to note. People who feel more on this side of the political spectrum might say, this is important to note. So you try your best to balance that out. When you're hosting and doing the talk show, I think it's all about being able to provide your opinion on it. And it's kind of, for me, a highly informed one because I've followed some of these stories so closely. And I have those opinions that I alluded to when I get the chance to host, thanks to John and Chad and Margot and your coaching, Curtis, kind of saying, here you go, take the ball and run with it. I let those opinions go. And I say, look, this is the way I've been thinking about this. And now I'm going to lay it out in terms of connecting it to the facts that I'm aware of and how I feel about it as a person who both lives in this city and works in this city and spends time in the tri-state and has opinions about it. So it's a balancing act, but you kind of put the one hat on, and then I think you're able to let it go a little bit more when you're doing the op-ed, the opinion, the hosting. This is what I see here when I look at this story.
All right. Well, James Flippin, our news guy, and now a substitute talk show host when required. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. And keep doing live and local news reports and talk radio, because that is the tradition now of WABC in the era of John and Margot Katzimatidis and Chad Lopez.
Well, thank you guys. John, Curtis, everybody there at the station, just Happy New Year, Merry Christmas. It's been, a great year. Looking forward to a really positive and hopeful 2025. And Curtis, let me just say, just for you.
Oh, yeah. Good stuff.